So I've rolled back a little bit here. Now this is the scene which I opened up at the beginning of the last video. Now I've rolled back basically because we're going to look at collisions in this video, and we don't want a start pose baked into the hair. Now this is because if I just quickly demonstrate NSolver interactive playback. So if we have the hair blowing like it was before, we just pause it there. So let's say this was our start pose. Now obviously we have hair cutting through the head, cutting through the back of her neck and out the side of her head there. So if this was the start pose, if we applied collision to the body, then the hair would already be inside the body. Whereas using this start pose means that the hair will drop naturally and collide with the body and not go through it. So in short, it's easier if you're using collisions for anything like this to just start with the base default start pose. So with that said, let's now go in and just make her body a collision object. Now we also have the scalp in here, but there's no point in having that and that as a collision, both assigned as collision objects. It's just doubling up the amount of collisions around this area. It'll take longer to calculate, and you may end up with some errors where there's the two layers of geometry. So let's just make her body into a collision object. Now we're not going to use the end hair menu. Instead we're going over to end mesh and we're going to use create passive collider. Now this will turn any object into a passive collision object. Now you see it's in the end mesh menu here, and that's because we can use this with end cloth, we can use it with particles, and of course we can use it with hair. So let's just go create passive collider. As you can see, this is added. If I open up the attribute editor, this has added this rigid shape node onto the body here. So let's just run this. Let's select that tab, that node first, so it deselects the body so we can see what we're doing. So if we run that, what we should see, as you can see here, now it's still going into the head slightly, but for the most part the hair is wrapping around the head. So rather than going through it, it's going to be wrapping around it because it knows that the hair needs to collide with the head. Now what it's probably doing is it's more than likely using the curves as the collision objects. So that's why we're seeing some of the objects, some of the hair interacting with the head. If you think the curve is running down the middle of each of these clumps, and that is what's colliding with the body. So that's why we've got this appearance of the hair going into the mesh. So let's just stop that there. We select the body again. So in here we have our standard collision options. You can decide which element you're going to collide with. We'll just leave it on face for now. Collision strength, thickness. If we turn on collision thickness here, you can see there, this is where the collision, this is sort of the offset of the collision node. If we adjust the thickness, rewind this, interactive playback again, so that just sort of adds a layer outside the object. If we turn off that thickness there, you see here, particularly here, this bit of the hair is colliding with the body, but because we have that offset, it's colliding outside there. And there we go, it's just slipped off the shoulder. So you can use the thickness there just to offset how the collision works. And obviously we have bounce, friction and stickiness. So if we rewind this, let's just turn up friction and just see what sort of effect that has. So again we have this stuck on the shoulder here. It doesn't appear to be much different, but what this will do is it will just mean that the surface isn't as slidey as it should be. Now this hair here is sort of sticking to this area here, more like a stickiness tab than a friction tab. So let's rewind that. Let's turn that back down. Let's turn stickiness up and just see the effect that has. Again, because we've probably because we have the wind on, you're not seeing the full effect, but you can see particularly around here, the hair is actually sticking to the body rather than landing on it and then gradually sliding off, which is the effect we had with friction before. So they're just some of the basic elements of a collision object and assigning it to your mesh. Let's turn the stickiness down. Now obviously we have this mesh here and our hair is colliding with it, so that's going to help us with our final pose. But we can also use the collision to help maybe sculpt the hair or move the hair around. So just to demonstrate this, we could create a sphere like so, Nmesh, create passive collider, and what that's done is made that into a collision object. So let's just move it up here, make it a little bit smaller, then just move out of the way. Interactive playback again, and then if I move this, you'll see it will interact with the hair. See at the top there? Again, if I go through, it's going to push the hair out of the way, and that's because it's colliding. So you can use this, so you can use collision objects to then interact with the hair, again, if you're animating. Or you could use different shaped objects to help and make them invisible if you want the hair to move a certain way or surround a certain object, or you know, it's up to you really, just you know, whatever your imagination can come up with. You could have a polygon plane here so that the hair is hitting sort of a flat surface just down here. What we can also do with our collisions is actually investigate the collisions on the hair itself. So if we go to our hair system, let's just close all these tabs, give us a bit more space. Here we have our collisions tab here, and again it's quite similar to what we saw before. You could turn collisions on and off. You can make the hair self-collide, and what this will do is it will collide with itself. So let's rewind this. Let's get the simulation running. So if we turn on self-collide, that will tell the hair to collide with itself. So let's go quickly, just jump down to solver display, self-collision thickness, and you get these tubes here, and that's telling it where it needs to collide with itself. Now again, a lot of these curves were passive curves, if you remember. So if you want more hair, if you want the hair to collide with itself a lot more, you need to add in more initial follicles, because the collisions are only working here off the actual the main follicles, so that's why we're not seeing much of a difference. Ignore this flicking around here, it's just because I've been playing around with the collisions and it's just getting a bit confused. Set that to collision thickness, or turn that off. Just like before, we can adjust that, make it thicker or thinner. If I turn that off, if we increase that, just subtly you can just see where those particular clumps are being affected. And again, just like before, you have the same collision flags here, vertex, edge, dictating how it's going to collide with the object, what's going to collide with what. Some are quicker, some are slower, some are a lot more, some work a lot better than others. So it's just up to you to play around and get get sort of a balance of what you're happy with. And again, we have our bounce, friction and stickiness down here, so we can play around with all those as well. Now, as well as collisions, what we can do is, because the end hair, the end cloth, the end particles are all part of the same sort of group, we can also use end constraints, and we can use these on the actual curves themselves. So let's just close this down. Let's get rid of that sphere. Let's just go back to our rigid shape. Just leave that as it is actually. So, end hair, display, current and start. So again, this is our start position. Now, let's select this curve here and this curve. Well, let's just select this curve here. We select these points here, and let's say we want this spike to stay up here. Could open up our constraint menu. You've got all these options to play with, but we're just going to use a transform for now. End solver, interactive playback. As you can see, because we have that constraint on there, it's keeping that hair up there. And this can then be animated or moved around, and that constraint is going to stay like that. We can also twist this if we need to, rotate it, just generally move this around. So there you can use the constraints as well. So you've got the collisions which you can use, you've got the constraints. So let's say she has her hair in a ponytail. You might want to put the hair together. So what you do is you would relax the hair so it falls naturally, adjust the curves so that they're bunched up at the back of the head, and then you'd use a constraint on those points to keep the hair around where her hair was tied together in place. So as you can see, there are lots of options, as well as just using the default dynamics for you to play with. And then there's all these which we can investigate as well, or what you should just play around with and get to grips with. Let's just stop that, rewind. The only thing is, when you jump back to your start pose, if you notice, this is now offset. So that's something you just have to consider. Interactive playback. And there we've got control over that hair. So there was just a quick overview of using collisions to control where your hair falls, what it can wrap around, and you can also use it assigned to other objects to interact with the hair once it's animating. And what we've also done is just very quickly look at using constraints to then lock areas of the hair, mainly points in the curves, and then you can animate those, or you can again use them to sculpt the hair. So I think we've covered all the main areas of setting up the hair now. We'll probably investigate some more as we're progressing through, but what I'd like to do in the next lesson is perhaps take everything we've learned over the past few videos and let's start to lock down what this character's hair is going to be like. So what we'll probably do in the next video is just go over everything we've learned again, but not in as much detail as I work my way through creating this character's hairstyle.